Welcome to the Austin chapter of Reasons to Believe. Thank you so much for our live audience that's with us again, but also thank you to our members who have shown up. It is so nice to see the faces again in the audience. It was so nice to hear the chatter again as we were waiting to begin. So thank you so much. Let me open this gathering with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time that we can get together and that we can gather together and can fellowship and worship you and learn more about you. Please help us as we take Dan's message and we thoughtfully reflect upon the truths and the knowledge that he's going to give us today, and help us as we go out into our community that we can be that light, that mirror unto you, whether it be to our families or friends or co-workers or neighbors. Please help us that we can go out and shine that light unto you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, last month we were very fortunate to have Dr. Rob Wilson speaking for us. He gave us an introduction to apologetics. It was a very good presentation. There were some good questions and answers at the end of that. Just a reminder that all of the presentations during this YouTube live event, while we've been broadcasting these chapter gatherings, are available on our YouTube channel, so you can go there and see other presentations from the months previous to this, and I would encourage you to check that out. So next month, we're going to have Bob Davis speak to us, and he's going to be speaking to us in regard to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so I don't know if you appreciate this, but in the 1800s, when Joseph Smith, they would disagree that he started the Mormon religion or the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They would say that his movement was a restoration of the original gospel, if you will. The assertion was that the Bible had been corrupted so much over almost 2,000 years of transmission that it contained a lot of errors. And back in the 1800s, that was something that could potentially be believable. However, the Dead Sea Scrolls have really put a big dent in that assertion. And so I'm really looking forward to Bob Davis coming and talking to us about the Dead Sea Scrolls and talking to us about what we have learned in the transmission of the text, the transmission of the Bible over the last 2,000 years. Also remind you, this is going to be our first return to the Longhorn for Christ Center, where we again are going to be meeting in person. Hopefully we're going to gather together, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of your faces who are watching at home, as well as the members here joining us again. So I don't know what sort of attendance we're going to have. I'm a little worried, but I'm also very excited about who is going to show up. So please make a point of being there. And one of the reasons why I chose Bob Davis to speak at this presentation is because he, along with John Werner, were the two original founders of the Austin Reasons to Believe chapter. And so it'll be a great renewal having him kicking it off live and in person. And then in September, Dr. Sarah Salviander is going to speak to us again. She's going to talk about the worldview challenge, and she's going to talk about how the various worldviews are able to describe reality and which worldview does the best job of describing reality and the world as we know it and as we experiencing it. The atheistic worldview has a real problem with origins, and I'm sure that she is going to dive into that. There's some real difficulties from that worldview to explain some of the things that we've learned and we know and we experience. Our speaker today, Dan Britton, says that his talk today hopefully is going to be a little bit of a primer for her talk, hopefully laying some fertile groundwork for her talk in September. So we're very much looking forward to having Dr. Salviander back to speak to us then. Now that is going to be on September the 11th, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy. If you can believe, it's been 20 years since that actually happened. And so next month we're going to elaborate on this a little bit further, but today, I did want to elaborate on a campaign that commemorates that date. It's called the Spread Some Light campaign. And so each one of you here in attendance, you should have one of these little Spread Some Light kits is what it's called. You can open your light kit. Tom, there are some here in this box, or Bob's bringing you one there, Tom. And so if you'll go ahead and open up your kit, I want to go through this and explain to you what this is just very briefly. And so you'll see inside that there are some cards. And so let me read what the concept is in its simplicity first. And this is inside. I didn't have a slide for this. But the concept is simple. Take this date, September the 11th, associated with acts of hate and evil, and commemorate it by committing intentional acts of love and kindness. Enclosed are several Spread Some Light cards. Hand these cards to anyone that you choose to help so that they will know that this is not a scam and that there's no strings attached. You are simply doing good for goodness sake. Use your imagination. Make the time to make a difference. And so if you pull out these cards, on the front of the card, you'll see just simply the logo, Spread Some Light. On the back of the card, you'll note that it says, commemorating September 11 by committing intentional acts of love and kindness, spread a little light. Choose to do something wonderful today. And then at the bottom, it mentions that it's inspired by Genesis 50:20, what others intend for harm, God can use for good. And so that is a reference to the story in Joseph. If you remember how Joseph was sold into slavery into Egypt by his brothers, but then Joseph turns out to be the one to save his family. And the verse, starting with verse 18, notes, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And so inside the cover of the light kit, you'll see in black and gray different ideas that you might have for acts of love and kindness that you could commit on September the 11th. So the concept is, when you do these things, give the person this card so that they'll know that you're not trying to scam them. You're not trying to do something underhanded, that they know that this is a genuine act to try and spread some love and kindness, commemorating this date, trying to do the opposite of what the terrorists were intending. So just to give you some examples, things that I have done in the past, for instance, if you're going through a drive-through, you'll hear people do this sometimes, you pay for the meal behind you at Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever it is. If you're going through the drive-through, you just tell them, listen, this is for my meal. I also want to pay for the meal behind me. Here's a card. Give it to that person so that they know why I did this. If you go to a restaurant, leave a big tip, a noticeably big tip. So all of a sudden they realize there's something a little bit different about this. Leave a card. Let them know why you left the card. September 11th is often commemorating the first responders and how they responded and they risked their lives to help the people. In the past, my daughter and I have gone to fire stations, and we have given them gift cards at restaurants. We have some police officers who live in and around our neighborhood, and sometimes they'll park their vehicles out in the street or in their driveway. We would go up to their vehicles, and we would leave a restaurant gift card and also this card so that they would know the purpose of that. You have 2 months to prepare for this. You have 2 months to save for this if you need to put it in your budget. Think about what you might do. It's been really great to hear some of the stories of people afterwards who came and told me about how things happened when they went out and did these and the reactions that they got. So I would encourage you to do this. Now, if you need more of these, or if you're listening at home and you want us to mail you some, just send us an email at reasonstbaustin@yahoo.com. and we'll drop some in the mail. We'll also have these at our August gathering. So if you're going to be at the August gathering, just plan on picking some up at that time. If you have any other questions, email us again at reasonstbaustin@yahoo.com. We'll be happy to answer those questions. So please prayerfully consider doing this on September the 11th to commemorate that event. Continuing with our announcements, so in October, Dr. L.D. Herzog is going to be speaking to us. He currently serves as the Vice President of the Austin chapter, and he's going to be talking about Adam and Eve, Scripture and Science. He's going to be talking about whether or not scientifically it's even credibly possible to think that Adam and Eve really existed and that the story of Adam and Eve and the garden isn't just some sort of a mythical tale. And so he will be bringing some scientific research to discuss with us, and that should be a very interesting and educational presentation. Again, that'll be October the 9th. So today we are very grateful, very thankful to have Dan Britton speaking to us. In the last several months, I've been able to talk about how blessed we are as a chapter to have so many scholarly, credentialed speakers speaking to us in the area of Christian apologetics, and how they have stepped up and given us numerous presentations. And we're very fortunate that Dan is another one of those scholars who speaks to us on an annual basis. And so Dan is going to be talking about the culture shift, and you probably have noticed that, especially if you're 15, 20, 25 years old, you've probably noticed that there seems to be more and more of a polarization in this society. It seems like less people are in the middle and more people are moving to the extremes. And so I presume that Dan's going to be talking a little bit about this, and as he said before, he hopes this is also going to help set up Dr. Salviander's talk in September. Now, I want to read Dan's bio so that I don't forget anything. So Dan is a full-time Christian apologist and pastor of equipping and apologetics at Hill Country Fellowship in Burnett, Texas. We're so thankful that he brought some of his students with him. So glad that y'all are here today. Thank you. He also has just accepted the role of National Director of College Prep Chapter Formation with the Ratio Christi's High School Apologetics Ministry. He graduated summa cum laude from Biola University with a Master's of Arts in Christian Apologetics, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in theology and apologetics at Corban University. He is also a commissioned Colson Fellow. Please, everybody, give Dan a hand as he comes up and gives us his presentation.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it, and very excited to be here at Reasons to Believe again. We're going to be talking about culture shift today, and this is a very significant topic because everybody recognizes that culture, unless you've been dead for the last 5 years, has changed pretty dramatically within the last 5 years even. But to say that it's got a long history is pretty much stating the obvious, but I want to highlight some of those areas where things have changed and what has started to move that shift. And as I said, or as John alluded to, this is very important to understanding the importance of an expression that's fairly new in our culture, and that is worldview. When John first approached me about speaking, I said, I want to do worldview. And he said, you can't. Sarah's already got it. And I thought, fine, then I'm going to set up Sarah so that when people have heard this and they go hear her talk, they'll go, okay, I'm totally getting it now. Because the worldview discussion is one of the discussions that drove me to become a Colson Fellow. I'm very happy to report that not only is my wife Leonora now currently going into the Colson Fellows program, but one of my assistants with our group, our Ratio Christi College Prep group, Mark, his wife Kay is going into it, and another friend. So we've got 3 more Colson Fellows right in the little community of Burnett. And I think that's really significant because we have to understand worldview and, more importantly, how to respond to it. But before we get to that, I think it's equally important we understand what has gone into what's been going on in culture that is bringing about this significant change and this significant necessity for Christians to understand it. There's a lot of things that have changed. I'll probably forget a few of them as we go through this, but I really want to highlight how that's happened. A lot of this material has come from a book by John Stonestreet, who's the president of the Colson Center, and Brett Kunkel. who is one of the Stand to Reason people that was instrumental in starting the Rethink Student Apologetics Conference. He now has his own ministry called Maven Truth, but his impact on students is very significant because who would have thought years ago that if you held a conference on apologetics for high school students, they would sell out. Prior to COVID, we go to the one up in Dallas, they had 1,600 students the previous year. So please don't tell me students don't care. I don't buy it. And these are evidences of it. However, before we really dig into it, I wanted to share something that hopefully will give you a little bit better understanding of what I do. And have you ever noticed that sometimes people have a natural ability? He's a really good basketball player. He's a really good French horn player, or maybe I should say she's a really good French horn player. I grew up, I didn't really think I had one. So I moved to Texas, and I find out that I'm actually fairly good at sailing. It comes with a lot of problems, though, because you have to learn quite a bit about sailing before you can declare, before you can declare yourself good at it. So I started out with probably the easiest boat to sail, which was a Hobie catamaran, and promptly learned how to flip it over and end up in the emergency room getting stitches in my knee because I hit the mast when it flipped and all kinds of crazy things like that. But the point is, it was a learning process. I became addicted to sailing in the sense that I stayed up in the wee hours of the morning to watch a 1987 America's Cup from Perth, Australia. Can I tell you that there's not anything as exciting as watching 12-meter boats race for an hour? They're pretty slow. At least this past year they had foiling boats, which was more entertaining. But that got me to the point that in around 2000, we bought a Beneteau 33-foot sailboat and loved it, and eventually traded that in. But everywhere I go, I sail if I have the opportunity. But that doesn't come just by saying, okay, I'm going to jump on the boat and I'm going to make it go. No, you have to have a lot of knowledge about it. So part of that is to understand, first and foremost, the effect of the sail in the wind. Now, the sail actually has the same shape as an airplane wing, an airfoil, and it has a rudder and a keel that offsets the motion of that. See, this is the scientific part of Reasons to Believe. We're going into Bernoulli's principle and a few other things. But the point being, we need to understand basically the points of sail, how to adjust the sails, and where to aim the boat in order to get the maximum speed. And then we also, in the case of catamarans, have to learn what to do when they flip over. So you can see we're having to learn quite a bit. Along with that, we have to learn basically what to look for regarding the wind. We not only have to be concerned about how to sail, but we have to be concerned about the source of power for what makes the boat go. We have examples of no wind in the middle. That's really dangerous wind when you see whitecaps. And then we also have to know how to navigate. This is for an example, what we might see if we were on the intercoastal waterway. They do have markers and things like that that you have to obey. So it's not as simple as just getting on a boat and going. The reality is, if you mess up, and this is actually a picture of our Beneteau 33-foot boat coming down from Kemah, going to Corpus Christi. I had turned the helm over to a friend of mine who promptly ran it aground. Now, I was advised by the salesman that you really ought to get the insurance, because it's really reasonable, from Tow USA in case something like this happens, and it's only like $100 a year. And I thought, okay, he's just trying to pad the invoice, so we're just not going to do that. This is day number 2, sailing from Kemah down to Corpus. and that tow was $450. That was an expensive lesson. I figured I paid about a $450 stupid tax that day. But anyway, all of this to say, we have to kind of understand what we're doing if we're going to navigate the waters either through sail or anything else. Now, I've got a number of reasons that I care so much about what's going on in culture. The first three reasons are in the picture on your left, and the other reasons are on your picture on the right. As John pointed out, I'm a super blessed man that I've got students here today. I think one of them's 12 or 13, and I know Kayla was actually here in November of 2019 when she barely hit John's waist, and now almost eye to eye with him, I think. But anyway, this is important, and the reason I want to point this out is to give you a sense that students do care. There's a whole bunch of them out there that want to know what's going on. They want to know how to respond to it. I was super blessed that one of the students back there, Sydney, brought a friend to NASA with us, who otherwise wouldn't have gotten to experience being with us as a group of Christians. So let's move on to culture. What is culture? There's a couple words there. Latin, to plow or till or to develop. And then, of course, the root word cult is worship. It's also our works. What we do in the course of our day-to-day lives, what we do for our job, what we do for our social life, that helps create this thing that we call culture. When we take it in collectively, it becomes our world and how we interact. We'll be getting into a little bit of how Christians should be interacting with the world in just a bit. And then what we're going to hear later through Sarah is how they manifest themselves in the different worldviews, how culture is manifested in the worldviews. What do those worldviews, what do the people that hold those worldviews tend to believe regarding culture? So there's a few things here of what it does. It communicates a vision. We have a Christian worldview. Kind of makes sense to have if you're a Christian. We can also say that not all Christians hold a totally Christian worldview. A lot of times people approach that as they do church. Well, I like this about this church, but that church does this thing that I don't like, or I don't like the color of the carpet, or there are things that just can be divisive that don't need to be. We have to be doctrinally sound. The worldview or culture orients us to these visions. As a Christian, I think of things Christianly. I try to behave and act in a manner that brings glory to Christ. We also want to reproduce those visions, and that's a really key thing about culture. The culture we're in allows us the ability to reproduce ourselves and to help bring more people into our culture. And it also cultivates our commitments to these visions. But there's a risk, and that risk is simply this. Who we hang around with can influence us. So we have to be careful about what cultures we have to engage in. It's pretty easy if you have a whole bunch of Christian friends and you hang out with them. But what do you do when you're with a group and you recognize, oh, wait a minute, they're not really Christian because of the language or because of, some of the jokes they're making? How do you respond to that? Do you respond antagonistically, or do you respond in a manner that will reveal who you are? One of the most difficult things we've talked about recently is how hard it is to be a Christian in high school. We had an event a while back where we had a retreat at a big ranch in Llano County, and we were talking about that it's difficult to share your Christian faith or to even display your Christian faith in high school. And one of the young men there that was helping with us graduated from Liberty Hill High School 6 years earlier, and he goes, wow, it wasn't that bad when I was in high school. We were, people knew we were Christian, but we were never really attacked. We just got along. But culture has changed. And a lot of that change is affecting us. One of the things you'll learn if you follow John Stone Street, Breakpoint, or anything regarding worldview, one of the key things that I expect Sarah will talk about is the idea or the notion that ideas have consequences. Good ideas have good consequences, bad ideas have bad consequences, and more importantly, bad ideas have victims. This is something that the Colson program teaches us as we go through it. They spread through culture with champions, and we're going to be hitting a few of those as we go through here. Institutions themselves maintain and perpetuate culture. Think of your favorite college. There's an organization called FIRE, I forget what the acronym stands for, but they rate colleges on the ability of those colleges to promote and hold to the ideas of the First Amendment, the free speech. And if your college gets a green light, that's a good thing. Texas A&M, if you look them up on that website, they have a green light. Very good school with regard to respecting freedom of speech. Anybody want to guess what UT Austin has? Yeah, nobody saying red? Okay, well, if you said red, you'd be right. Now, that's kind of scary. And one of our friends has a Ratio Christi chapter down there, and she has told me on numerous times the hostility to Christianity on that campus is pretty significant. But here's one of my favorite expressions. If you want to know what the water is, don't ask the fish, because the fish doesn't know it's wet. So we have to be careful who we engage with when we start talking about these subjects. I want to just take a few minutes to go through this because I thought this was pretty revealing. One of the things we like to do a lot is within whatever lesson we're teaching on Monday or Wednesday nights with students or discussing, we've kind of moved away from more of the teaching aspect and more of we're trying to do more of a Socratic thing where we have discussion, talk about how should we be responding to this, really getting some good conversations going. But one of the ways to counter bad ideas, this was a study that was done, and the argument was put forth that brushing your teeth is bad for you. Man, I would have loved that as a little kid because I said, see, Mom, I don't have to brush my teeth. But there are a number of responses. There's no preparation. You're just thrown to the wolves. Here's an argument. What do you think? Okay, the next one is a reinforcement of the previous preparation, and that's basically when somebody says brushing your teeth is bad for you, they will say, yeah, brushing your teeth is bad for you. And when they stick that on there, you go, oh, they're speaking with some degree of authority. The third one's warning of an attack. There'll be people that come against you because they don't think brushing your teeth is bad for you. So that's another option. The fourth one is it's starting to look a little bit better because we talk about inoculation. And we also talk about this in dealing with our Christian walk in culture. Are we inoculated against some of the things we're going to see? But you know what? That one doesn't work as well as it should either. You'll hear an argument that brushing your teeth is bad for you, but it wipes away the tooth enamel or some similar argument trying to refute it. The fifth one combines inoculation with refutation. You know, when you hear the argument that brushing your teeth is bad for you, keep in mind that saliva cannot dislodge prepared food from the teeth, only a brush can do that. So you're going, okay, now that's starting to make a little more sense. But the sixth one is really the most powerful. And that's what we're trying to do with Ratio Christi, with most of the places that we talk about apologetics. We try to not only inoculate and refute, but prepare. And that's really the key expression in that last one, preparation. You know, you have to have some knowledge about what you're talking about in order to be effective at countering bad arguments. And in that one it says, you know, one argument you'll hear to persuade you is that brushing your teeth is bad, but you'll be presented with several arguments, and it will be up to you to think them through and refute them. This is a model that we try to do on Monday and Wednesday nights when we're talking about things like this. You know, how do you respond to that? How should you respond? And collectively, things will work out pretty good. We're going down to the beach in 2 weeks, and I'm very excited about that. We're doing our third annual student summer apologetics retreat, North Padre Island. And we had a friend that had worked with me a number of years ago, Levi Holder, who's now a youth pastor at Grace Point Church down there in Portland. Well, Levi had invited me to come talk to the middle school students about 4 or 5 years ago when they were meeting at his house. And one of the things I like to do when I engage any new group of students is the infamous 3x5 cards. A lot of the students that have been with me for a while, they cringe when they see me get that out because they know they're going to have to write something down. But these 3x5 cards are really good because I say, ask the one question you would be afraid to ask your pastor or your parents that you want to know about your Christian faith, or even afraid to ask God. And you'd be amazed at the depth of these questions. So anyway, did that, talked a little bit about apologetics, collected the cards, and left the gathering. About 2 months later, Levi says, hey, would you come back and give us another lesson? Oh, sure thing, I'd love to. What I did, I had written down all the questions and gave them numbers, and I would go to each student and I'd say, pick a number. And they'd pick a number, I'd read the question, and they'd start talking about it. Do you know that the first 3 students were able to collectively get the correct answer without any involvement from me? And they did that by asking their friends. So there was a discussion going on where they were getting their answers. Now the 4th student, whose name I can't remember and I probably should, she goes, hey, wait a minute. Those are the same questions we asked 2 months ago. I go, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. If you bring them out into the open and start talking about them, you don't need me there necessarily to come up with an answer. You can do it collectively. But that's why we have to be prepared and why we do what we do. So engaging with culture, there's 3 cultural models of engagement. And I have a whole session on this. The first one's the withdrawal model. And you probably know these folks. They're the ones that say, well, we go to church and we have our home group and we just pretty much hang out with our church people. That they don't engage with culture. Or if they go to work, you know, they tend to find other Christian friends to go to lunch with and stuff. The second one is a culture changes us model. Very, very sad to report that this is a model we see most of today. When we start looking at worldview and things like that, this is the one that jumps out at us. You don't have to pick up a newspaper. Boy, that was a dated reference, wasn't it? You don't have to browse an online news source to realize that that's really, really a challenge today for a Christian to maintain their faith in light of what's going on in culture. We see that all over the place. But what we are called to be, and this is the scriptural position, is to be counterculture. See, I thought when I was in the 60s and is it possible to be a conservative hippie? That's a question I'd like to know the answer to. But if it was possible, I was a conservative hippie. The students had a strike on campus. This was 70s, 74 time frame. And I show up to math class, and the professor is an ex-Marine with a flat top. And he said, "Britton, what are you doing here?" Because I had pretty long hair and covered most of my head. And I said, "Are we not having class?" He said, "You're the only one here. Why aren't you out there with your friends?" I said, "Well, they're not my friends, they're stupid." He goes, "What?" I said, "Do you know what tuition at this place costs? I'd be losing a couple $100 if I missed this class." So in that very difficult course, Calculus 3, I got a B. I probably didn't deserve it, but I think I had favor with the ex-Marine because this hippie showed up for his class and acknowledged that the student demonstrations going on were stupid. So that was my early introduction to being counterculture. So why do we need to be counterculture? What's the deal with that? I mentioned Brett Kunkel. Brett has just an amazing ministry of reaching young people. He does immersion trips to Salt Lake City. How would you like to be a Mormon family and see 2 Christian students knock on your door to proselytize Jesus Christ? That's what he does. And they have a blast doing it. But he'll do a few of those a year. But he's a very popular speaker. And this was a Catholic college, the College of St. Rose. I can't remember the location, but Brett was there speaking. And it was a very significant event talking about what Brett was good at, which is how to deal with doubt. He had a whole session on the subject of doubt and why that's a good thing. But he couldn't figure out why, he didn't have a lot of students there. And then he noticed this line of students in the second picture lined out the door to this auditorium. And at a Christian Catholic school, it was a drag show through the ages. Now, you might be surprised, but I'm here to tell you shouldn't be. This is not that unusual. My guys, my dear friends and people that tolerate me on Monday and Wednesdays know that I can take some pretty hard stuff. But what you see, I guess that's not really red out, but oranged out, were titles of topics at Sex Week at the University of Tennessee that I found offensive. Now, I probably have some that are going, "Oh my gosh, Dan found something offensive?" But I did. The titles were just vulgar. But this is what your tuition money pays for. This is what the student activities fee pays for. Is anybody aware that this isn't happening? Because it is. Back in the day, I think it was about 74 time frame, a lot of people were outraged where a guy by the name, I don't even remember what his previous name was, but he became a she and she became Renee Richards, a transgendered semi-pro tennis player. But what happened back then was like a spike. It was newsworthy, and then it went away. And it stayed away until we heard about Chastity Bono becoming Chaz Bono. And then, of course, the most recent gubernatorial candidate, Bruce, AKA Caitlyn Jenner. Now, this is mainstream news now. It's not uncommon to see. This is something that has become culturally acceptable and, more importantly, newsworthy. Look at what 4 years difference makes. Unless my math is incorrect, that's a 10-fold increase in worldwide abortions. That's frightening. And I'll share more about why that's even more frightening when we look at population data. One of our favorite things that we do when we minister at the prison, one of the things we'll do at the coast, our dear Emma hosted it last year, and that's called Tough Questions. What are the tough questions? How do we answer those tough questions? We can also call those burning questions. What are those burning questions? And this is a big one, how did we get here? What were some of the signature events that brought us to this point in culture where most of us, even teenagers, are going, wow, a lot's happened recently. Well, as somebody that's fixing to be 70 in another month, a lot has happened in the 7 decades I've lived. When I was in college, this was the pulse of what was going on in the 60s and 70s. We had the Black Panthers, we had the 4 students murdered at Kent State, we had the National Organization for Women and the Equal Rights Amendment. True story, for 1 year I was a card-carrying member of the National Organization for Women. I don't understand how a male could do that, and today it probably wouldn't be allowed, but back then it was very acceptable because we didn't have the gender wars that we seem to have today. Sit-ins, protests, and counterculture icons. You are a true music nerd of the 70s if you know who that is. That's Patti Smith, who was actually a fairly decent lyricist. She was not a good singer. So we end up at a place where we get at a crossroads today, and it's a difficult place to be because we've got a lot of different directions. A lot of stuff is unclear to us. A lot of stuff can be confusing. And basically, unless you study and learn about culture and worldview, you're kind of going to be at a loss to explain to people how they should be responding to it. And that's what I want to kind of work into as I get toward the end of this talk today. How should we be responding as Christians, as believers? But I want to show some of what you're up against. And this is not new news. Brad Pitt, I didn't understand this idea of a God who says, you have to acknowledge me. I can't see a God operating from ego, so it made no sense to me. Does anybody not deny that Brad Pitt might have somewhat of an influence over our culture, over our students, heck, over adults? I keep saying students, but I miss the fact that I'm a 70-year-old student, so it covers all of us. Thomas Edison, I have never seen the slightest scientific proof. I mean, hey, Tommy, can I introduce you to Dr. Sarah Salviander? She might be able to, enlighten you a little bit. And speaking of that, that was some of the most enlightening stuff I had as a new believer at the age of 47 when I started looking at Genesis and started realizing, oh my gosh, that evidence was right in front of me all along, and I was just blind as a bat. Absolutely blind as a bat. I can't remember how many years I've been doing apologetics, but it's like almost every day something new comes to light, and I go, yep, Yep, there's another one, another proof point. Of course, now the problem is in the church we're chastised because we love evidence, we love reason, we love facts. And they say, oh, you just need faith. Yes, I recognize we need faith, but blind faith doesn't get it done anymore, at least for me. Stephen Hawking, basically we're a computer, and at the end of the day, when our components fail, that's it, we're done. It's kind of sad that he thinks that as believers, we believe in a fairy story because we're afraid of the dark. No, I believe in a story because I'm looking forward to the light. So, sorry, Stephen, you might be a brilliant man, but John Lennox said it best, and you'll have to look that quote up yourself because I totally forget what it is. Richard Rorty. Here's a guy that's going to strip your fundamentalist religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable. He doesn't even want us to talk about them. I have been shut down on a number of occasions because somebody will say, I don't care if it's true, I'm not going to believe it. Seriously? Okay. Here's a great exercise for you then. You tell me you got a headache, I got 2 white pills here, they'll both cure a headache, which one do you want? You don't care, you don't want me to discuss what I have in my hand? You just don't care because they're both going to cure a headache. Well, here's the news flash. One of them's an aspirin and the other one's an arsenic pill. They'll cure the headache, but I think you might want to discuss it first before you determine which one you're going to take. It just makes sense to me. Daniel Dennett, I think, is one of the most dangerous. They will see me as just another liberal professor trying to cajole them out of some of their beliefs. And they are dead right about that. That's what I am, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Don't think for a minute the atheist worldview is nice and fluffy. There are a number of them out there that are gunning for us, gunning for Christians, gunning for anybody that doesn't believe as they do. Bart Ehrman. I got chastised by somebody at the church because they were looking over my Facebook and they saw that Bart Ehrman is a friend. How can you be a friend with somebody like that? Well, it might help to know what he's thinking. It might help to know what he puts out there that contradicts the Christian claims. And oh, by the way, I hate to burst it to you, got a couple of homosexuals in the group as well, and so on and so forth. But you see, I'm trying to be counterculture. I'm not trying to withdraw and just keep my circle of friends, those with whom I have almost 100% agreement. It's okay for us to do that. Back in the day, we could have civil discourse. It seems like even that's going away now. We can't talk to anybody about anything without risk of offending them. But Bart's basically saying the entire first century, Jesus is not mentioned in a single Greek or Roman, by a single Greek or Roman historian. Is there anybody here that would believe such a claim? And yes, that is a verified quote. My response, I've got a handful of students here that could have punched a hole in that one. Cornelius Tacitus, he's generally regarded as the greatest Roman historian, talked about it. Thales, again, a Greek historian. Suetonius, Mars Bar Seraphim, a Syrian philosopher, not even a Christian person. Josephus. Josephus is generally regarded as a good historian, although he is prone on occasion to exaggerate. Some of his numbers just don't add up, but overall he's generally well regarded. Lucian of Samosata was one of my favorites because he was a playwright. He wrote plays, and in this play, I think it was called The Death of the Peregrine, he commented about Jesus Christ and how the Jews had crucified their so-called Messiah. And I can't remember the exact wording, but he put it in the play to get a laugh from the audience. The people in the audience would have had to know who Jesus Christ was, because otherwise his line, the script that he had for the play would have fallen flat. But he obviously knew his audience well enough, since he was a very highly regarded playwright. He knew it well enough that he could put this joke in there, and people, when they heard it, they would laugh. So I think that's really significant as evidence that Jesus did, in fact, live during that time. We love memes. I think Kayla's with us today, and her brother Caden is the king of memes. I won't tell you which student a number of years ago told me, "No, Dan, it's not Mimi, it's memes." But see, even old dogs can learn new tricks. But this is a self-refuting argument. And there's so many out there. One of the favorite things we like to do is the logical fallacies, because some of them are just almost unbelievable that so-called educated people can utter them. But speaking of absolute truth, let's take a look at a few things that have been going on in our culture. Who remembers Lady Gaga's famous meat dress? MTV Video Music Awards 2010. The good news is no filet mignon was sacrificed to make that dress. It was condemned, but Time named it the top fashion statement of 2010. Now, I'm really sorry, but does anybody here think that warrants a top fashion statement? I mean, maybe the top joke's on you statement, but certainly not a fashion statement, because I don't see any of the famous designers rushing out to create a line of meat dresses. A personal favorite, we have several artists in our group, and this one is just almost unbelievable. 1917, it was bought for about the equivalent of $4 US, $40 US today. It's an actual, and there's actually a product number that you could order and buy this in any hardware store. He signed it, put it in an art exhibit, and it was wildly popular, a major landmark in 20th century art. What was scary was the 8 replicas, it wasn't even the original, sold for $1.7 million. I don't want to meet the artist, I want to meet the 8 people that bought them. Because, man, we could use some funding for our group, and I think that might be a good source. I think it was Sydney recently brought me the one that the Frenchman that had sold a sculpture that only existed in his imagination for $18,000. Fact check me on this, please. How do you do that? And again, I don't care so much to meet this Frenchman that came up with this. I want to meet the person that wrote the $18,000 check for an imaginary sculpture that existed only in his mind. The good news is he wouldn't have to worry about where he's going to put that in his house. C.S. Lewis is probably one of the most quotable apologists out there. You know, decades later, his wisdom is still profound. But this was a cornerstone of what we studied in the Colson program. The most dangerous ideas in society are not the ones being argued, but the ones that are assumed. Think about that for a minute. How many things do we just assume that that's the way it's going to be? So on and so forth. The difficulty we have today in navigating this culture shift is recognizing the impact that that culture has on our evangelism. This is just a little sample thing I put together as part of our lessons on engaging culture that talks about what it means to go from a position of unbelief to a position of faith in Jesus. And the example, as you can guess here, is more geared toward high school, middle school students. Because, your Sunday school might have an impact, parents taking you to a church. I was super, super blessed. We had a student that went to Rethink, and upon hearing Frank Turek's topic on why God allows evil, or how evil proves the existence of God, had her moment. And in that time became a believer. She said, I knew at that moment it was real. And in a discussion with her, she revealed, I'd gone to church, I'd been baptized, I did all the Christian things, but I realized now I was never a Christian. So a lot of things are like that we experience, we see. When is that moment that you truly came to believe and truly came to understand? Yes, going to Sunday school may be a good thing. Going to youth group may be a good thing. But until you start to make your faith your own, you're probably just as well staying home and studying on your own. Just my 2 cents worth. There's also a lot of things that come against us that prevent us from marching down that field. And they're in the way of, block plays and things like that. One of the disturbing things I did recently, I guess that gets everybody's attention when I say something I did disturbing, but I asked Monday night students of the youth group that normally meets on Wednesday group, how many are Christian? The answer came back, maybe 50%. I saw an email from a youth pastor not long ago talking about things that were going over the summer schedule and things like that. And in that email, he was talking about students, and he said, the majority of which are apathetic at best. We don't need apathetic. We need somebody that's committed. And to that end, we need to also recognize that when we're dealing with culture, we're dealing with those influences that keep us from reaching that end zone. Christian students that are getting high and drunk. Yeah, if you fall and stumble, that's fine. But if that's your lifestyle, just stop saying you're a Christian. That does too much damage. We are going to screw up. It was kind of funny. I was real proud of myself because when I became a Christian, I still dropped the F-bomb pretty frequently, and I cleaned it up, as you can imagine, quite a bit. And I was bragging one day, and my friend Jordan pointed out, I said, yeah, I haven't dropped the F-bomb in years. And she said, no, you did it last year. Oops. But I don't think that means I'm going to hell. That just means I need to be a little more careful. So anyway, there's lots of things that influence us. But as you can see from this particular slide, in the football field of faith, a lot of those things are negative. But we still have to deal with them. So, stated another way, as a Christian, is your goal to survive or thrive? a lot of us are just going to settle with surviving in culture. We say, oh my gosh, come on, come Lord Jesus, come. Please stop saying that. How about get out of the car and go talk to people? Get out of your comfort zone and do something to further the cause of the kingdom. Let's stop being passive and sitting back and hoping somebody else will take care of it. You know, I heard one time, and I think it's really profound, if you've ever prayed at all as a Christian, sometimes you pray for laborers. You've got a child, you've got a parent, you've got somebody you care about that's in a bad situation, and you say, dear Lord, bring a laborer to them. And I love that, but a lot of times we kind of hear that and we miss the point that, hey, maybe we're that laborer for somebody else's prayer. Maybe we need to go speak to that guy that's sitting in the coffee shop that's teared up for whatever reason we don't know. You know, it's okay to do that. I have to summarize these because I doubt even if you could read them, but there are several things that I think are important. Has anybody ever had a really bad day and you just kind of shout out to God, why? Why do you have me doing that? I really don't want to do that. I'm old. One of the things we're doing at the retreat in 2 weeks is I'll be teaching on 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and the 7 messages to the 7 churches at Revelation. And when I started preparing the lessons, I thought, what am I thinking? I got 20 hours just in one lesson on 1st Timothy. And you guys are going to pay very close attention, right? No, but the point is, it's tough to do that. So I have those days where I go, why? Why don't I just find a video on 1 Timothy and play that? You know, I shouldn't have said that because they know I do that sometimes. But anyway, the first text there is from a student that, by the way, is now married. She got married over the summer. And this was a text when she was a freshman to her dad. And again, I can make this slide deck available to you if you want to see it. And I also have it available so you can see the notes with each page. But that first text is from her to her father. And she says, I'm really glad for the apologetics Dan and Hunter, our former youth pastor, taught because I needed it today in philosophy class. And Dad writes back, well, give him some Jesus. She said, I did. Now, I remember Sean McDowell, who was just a great mentor to me. He made a comment one time when I was at Biola University about how the movie God's Not Dead is fictional. And I've always thought about sending him that screenshot because that plays out exactly the same way it does in the movie. But like I said, that young lady is now married. The middle one is a text, or is a Facebook post. And we went to Rethink, I don't remember the year, but at the 11th hour, I had a mother reach out to me and say, hey, so-and-so really wants to go. He didn't want to go, but now he wants to go. I said, fine, we'll make it work. So we made it work, you know, literally 10 o'clock at night the night before, making arrangements for him to go on this trip. Well, this is a Facebook post that she posted after he got back. And she basically said he came back a totally changed young man, pretty much on fire. You know, his faith had just been incrementally strengthened by what he had heard at Rethink. So very, very valuable. The last one is Brett Kunkel again. Gets a text from a student at a Christian college, and they've been assigned the God delusion. And the comments along the lines, wow, I'm glad I'm prepared for this. I had somebody be critical and say, why would you teach a God delusion at a Christian college? And my response, why wouldn't you? You can't know how to refute these bad ideas unless you know what they are. I mean, that's part of the whole worldview scheme of things. We have to know what the others are thinking in order to be able to have an effective response. Another thing I do, I got asked by Faith Academy, which is a Christian high school in Marble Falls, Texas, to come and speak to the graduating seniors. They had a week of 1-hour sessions, so they asked me to speak at 3 of those and pretty much tell them what to experience when they got to college, which I did. As a side note, here come the 3x5 cards again. So I go there, there's about 11 students. I say, here's your card. I want you to answer a couple of questions. The first one was, what's your biggest expectation at college? And my political, religious, and moral standards being put up against a grinder, which tests the strengths of my morals and knowledge. That was fairly typical of the other 10 answers. But the biggest fear, folks, this is a reality check. Temptations of the mind and body. Falling into worldly fads that destroy decency and faith. That is really profound coming from a high school senior. Just the realization that there's an expectation that that might be a reality for them when they get off to school. So to wrap up, let me conclude with this. Burning question, what can parents do? I think the most effective thing you can do as a parent, grandparent even, is engage in some fashion with Ratio Christi. Ratio Christi, Latin for the reason of Christ, is a campus organization. We have chapters on the university. As John mentioned in the introduction, I am now the national director for the college prep chapters, which are high school chapters. We just about a month ago had our first new one in Charlotte, North Carolina, Ratio Christi College Prep, Hickory Grove Christian Academy. And that chapter will be launching in September. But this gives us an opportunity, whether it's a homeschool group, a private Christian school, a church group, where we can go out and start teaching the reasons that our faith is true. The second thing a parent can do is go through the Colson Fellows program. As John mentioned, I'm a commissioned Colson Fellow. I am not a graduate, because when you graduate, you're done. They use the word commissioning deliberately, because commissioning means you're just getting started. You're commissioned into this new role to bring about the Christian worldview and apologetics to the world. Now, you might be thinking, well, John heads up the Reasons to Believe chapter. Dan's speaking here, so Dan's going to suck up to John by putting Reasons to Believe on here. Furthest thing from my mind. Okay, well, maybe not totally. But the point with this is, David Kinnaman wrote a book called You Lost Me. There are 6 major reasons students leave the faith. One of them is because faith, as practiced in the Christian church today, is anti-science. So you better believe Reasons to Believe is on there. I'm excited that we've got students that go, but quite candidly, I'd like to see about half of the chapter meetings filled with students, high school students, because there they can learn the truth of Christianity and how science does not contradict it, and as a matter of fact, many times confirms it. Sarah gave a presentation on the 6 days of Genesis, and man, I tell you, when you see how that marries in with the biblical account, there are no options. You know, to deny that that's true would be to deny truth. So Reasons to Believe is a very, very important organization in terms of reaching those students that walk away from the faith because they believe science contradicts the Bible. It absolutely does not. I believe it's quite the contrary, that it confirms the Bible. What about the students? Summit is probably the single biggest contributor to strong Christian students out there. They have a 2-week conference that teaches worldview and apologetics, 60 hours of instruction from A-team apologists: John Stonestreet, Jim Wallace, Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell, Christopher Yuan. It's a who's who of thought leaders in Christian apologetics and worldview. That's the good news. The bad news is it's expensive. It's I think, around $1,600 for 2 weeks. But what price would you be willing to pay to have about a 90% probability that your student would never walk away from their faith? They did a study called Turning the Tide, and they looked at data going back since the inception of Summit, and over 90% of the students remain strong in their faith. That's a stat we should be embracing. Impact 360, very similar type of organization in Atlanta, Georgia. There is no state named Jordan. There's a person named Jordan, but not a state. And Maven Truth with Brett Kunkel. Again, very similar organization. The last one's a brag slide. Ways students can impact culture just by being here, by learning about stuff. Does anybody recognize the slide on the right? Yeah, John, you don't get the answer. That's one of these students right here, Jordan, and her friend Kylie, teaching at Reasons to Believe on the McDonald Observatory Field Experience. The slide on the left is them sharing that with a group of adults in a home group. That's the ways students can impact culture, by taking what they've learned and sharing it. It's almost a little bit of a standing joke. I can't even call it a joke, but when people talk about our group, our Ratio Christi College Prep, sometimes it's with reverence, and sometimes it's just, I can't believe those guys. You know, they just know so much. But trust me, that's a good thing, especially in light of today's culture. So with that, I will close and open up the floor for questions. So thank you very much. And as I said, I can get the slide deck to anybody that wants it. Dan Britton at ratiochristi.org, or track down John or one of the leaders.
Dan, thank you very much. Really appreciate you sharing your time and your wisdom. So I do want to have some questions here from the audience. And so 2 things I would remind audience members. First of all, if you have a question, please come back to the microphone so people at home can hear it. 2 rules that we have in the chapter. One is that when you have a question, ask a question. Sometimes people like to ramble and give their own commentary. But if they need to set up the question with some brief commentary, that's great. But please be sure to ask a question. And the second rule in the chapter is I'm the president. I get to ask the first question. So here's my question. I always love it when you bring your students. It's always very affirming when your students are here. So we're thankful that they're here. One of the analogies that I often give to students is that friends can be like an elevator. Friends can lift you up to places, to highs that sometimes you may not have been able to make on your own. Friends can also drag you down to depths that you never want to see, ever want to see. And so in engaging with the culture, it's very important how we choose our friends and the people that we are going to hang out with and know. So on the one hand, you don't want to be around people that are going to really drag you down, right, and get you into trouble and cause a lot of problems. On the other hand, you also don't want to just just sit in a cave with other like-minded people and not be associated with or listen to anyone that has a different opinion, because the only way you could truly grow is to be exposed to other people and other ideas and so forth. So how do you navigate that line between picking your friends rightly or wrongly as good advice to students as they go off to college?
I should probably just direct that question to Sydney, who seems to be a student that does it better than anybody I know. Sydney has a number of friends that don't believe as she does, and yet she still maintains relationship with them, even to the point of inviting one to our NASA trip, and it was extremely effective. But the point being, you have to watch it because you are what you eat, in the sense that if you eat junk food, you're probably not going to be all that healthy. My analogy engine just failed, so just have to roll with that one. But we can be counterculture, but we also have to take the admonishment that Paul so often writes in the New Testament about recognizing false teachers, false pastors, false et cetera, and while we are to engage with them, we are not to embrace in a close fellowship with them. Probably one of the worst mistakes I made in my career working with young people was a number of years ago when we had a similar thing. We had an overnight down to the beach. This was probably, 12 years ago, and at the last minute the pastor said, "Hey, you need to take this kid because this will be a great opportunity for him to see other Christian students." And I was new enough that I said, "Sure, why not?" And it was a train wreck. What he ended up doing was sneaking out of the condominium, going to the convenience store, buying snuff and teaching, a handful of boys how to do it, and pretty much staying out all night. So the Christians in the group failed to influence him, but boy, he sure influenced them. So we have to have discernment into the degree in which we will engage somebody. And I think it is hard for students because, and I don't think it's necessarily students, I think it's our human nature that we want to be liked, we want to be popular, but at the end of the day, I don't want to hang around the bar scene anymore. I don't want to hang around a lot of unbelievers. I've gone to lunch with a bunch. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but we have to really guard ourselves with regard to who is having an influence over us. I think, I just need to shut up because I could go off on that for quite a while.
One other quick question. All throughout time, a culture shift is happening. We have a lot of references of that within the Bible and historical records. How do you translate some of those historical events in culture shift? You mentioned a lot in your presentation about current day culture shifts that affect and are visible to us today. How do we translate some of that back to the historical and biblical references in culture shift for our young people today?
We are going to rewind that pretty far. Sydney, by the way, is my teaching assistant for the next year and few months. Jordan, who is over there, was my teaching assistant for 15, 18 months. And Sydney doesn't know it yet, but she's going to be preparing a presentation on the early church councils, because the early church councils addressed exactly issues like that. What is the Trinity? The conflicts, the cultural things that the early church was coming up against. And I think we'll just limit it to the first 8. But the point is, they've gone on forever. The papal decrees, the Vatican councils, all of those events were held more often to counter something that went against sound doctrine. Now, of course, a few of them brought in unsound doctrine of their own, but what's been going on now is not unusual because there's an entire history of it. You know, there's nothing that we've talked about today in the sense of contrary to a Christian worldview that hasn't probably preceded us. I will share this anecdote because I think it's awesome. We've been going through R.C. Sproul's Everybody's a Theologian. Candidly, it's painful because R.C. goes very deep, and we've been studying that. But the reason we've been studying that is we want to be able to spot unsound doctrine. And part of that, which has been real popular, is we will look at a video clip, partial or whole, of a sermon, and I won't tell you who all we've tackled, but we'll look at those and we'll discuss, was that good? Was that bad? Why was it good? Why was it bad? To be able to teach discernment in listening, what we hear. Because I would probably argue that there's probably no one single pastor that I would be in 100% agreement with. But there's probably a lot of them, I'm 95% there, and the things I don't agree with aren't salvation issues anyway. One of my favorite debates to avoid. I absolutely would love to jump in with both feet, but I just don't see a good result, and primarily a huge investment of time is the young earth versus old earth debate. I'm an unapologetic old earth creationist. I recognize I've got a lot of friends that are young earth, and I'm fine with that. Can we just stop with the first 5 words, in the beginning God created, and can we just agree on that and leave that other discussion for some other time? Because it's not a salvation issue. Now, I will qualify that. If you tell me I'm going to hell because I don't believe the literal interpretation, I do have a problem with that. Because the word yom has many different meanings. So I'm not countermanding the Word of God. As a matter of fact, the founder of Reasons to Believe had one of the most eloquent quotes about that I've ever read. In the Genesis debate, that was the name of the book, Hugh Ross wrote, "If we find a conflict between the Word of God and science, we have to ask ourselves, have we erred in our interpretation of one or both?" Case closed. I absolutely love that. But I think it's important to realize that these things have been going on for quite some time.
I would like to ask, what do you think is the primary reason for this culture shift in the last 5 years?
For the what? Oh,
For
the
the
culture shift?
in this shift in our culture, away from, just
Access.
Christianity, everything. What is bringing about? What is the primary reason for this?
Okay, everybody got a smartphone? Hold it up. That's it. The access to information. I actually knew how to use a paper card index in a library, where you go up to those big racks and you pull it out and you're doing this. We don't even need that anymore. One of the young ladies that couldn't make the trip today, we affectionately dubbed our Google girl, because I'll be talking about something and I'll say, "Paige, give us a fact check." Now, don't even get me started on the reliability of Google, but for quick and dirty, it's often good enough. So, but yeah, I think that is really what's going on, the fact that we have so much information available to us now that we've lost the ability to discern what's true and what's not, which is why I think that's such a critical component of teaching Christianity, its doctrines, and the worldview behind it.
I might follow up with that. Actually, a little bit of a segue into my question that I think that we as Christians have been very off-putting. We have this reputation of being very condescending and judgmental. And if you look at the skit on Saturday Night Live with Dana Carvey and the church lady, if you remember how funny the church lady was, it was because it was an exaggeration of a grain of truth, and that is that we can be very condescending and judgmental. And oftentimes in apologetics, we forget that the goal is not so much to win the argument, it's always to win the person.
Yes.
And so we really should be much more kind and loving. And so that leads into my question about engaging the culture. You know, it's always a Christian mission to be in the world but not of it. How can we more lovingly engage the culture and be a better witness to the love of Jesus in that respect?
Well, to answer the question of how to engage, I know this might seem a little weird, but I'm going to cite scripture. I have to say that because the point John was making, we've abdicated our authority from the pulpit. We've been trying to be too seeker-friendly. Lessons and, you know, the old adage, the church is a mile wide and an inch deep. There just is not a lot of solid teaching. We had Abby Johnson, somewhat famous in the movie Unplanned, her life story. She came to speak at a fundraiser for the Highland Lakes Pregnancy Resource Center. She's standing on our church pulpit, and she's giving her message. And she does this very deliberately. When was the last time you heard anybody from this pulpit talk about abortion? The answer was never. We've abdicated our authority because we want to be culturally relevant, and we want to be, like a lot of us, we just want to be liked. Oh, everybody's hostile against the church. I guess I need to preach a light and fluffy message. The biggest issue is people say, Jesus is love, God is love. Yeah, kind of help me out here. Everybody knows that he overturned the tables in the tabernacle. But what about those people that says, have we not cast out demons in your name? Have we not prophesied in your name? And Jesus delivers what I believe was speaking truth in love when he said, get behind me, I never knew you. Note that he didn't say, get behind me, you're going to hell. Note that what he said ought to have served as a warning to them. I never knew you. You were doing this out of your own vanity to bring glory to yourself, not me. I didn't know you. But getting back to John's point of how do we do it, yes, absolutely, it's about winning the soul, not winning the argument. And sadly, there are apologists out there that totally focus on, man, I'm going to score points if I can win the argument. Yeah, you might win the argument, but that guy's never, ever going to listen to another thing you have to say about Christianity. And by the way, he's probably not going to listen to anybody that has anything to say about Christianity. So you better use what I call the discernment of the Holy Spirit in how you minister to anybody. You know, you might have some gay friends, and one of those gay friends might be flamboyant, you know, totally out there, and you can be real with him, you can be authentic, you can make jokes, and he's just fine with it, but you've got the relationship. That same method may not work with the next gay person you're friends with or gay man you meet. If you try doing what you did with him, with this guy, he might run for the door. So that's where the discernment of the Holy Spirit comes in. What do I need to say to this person? I had an occasion to share with a woman that profoundly impacted me in the late 80s when I was at the height of my depravity. She was a Christian. She didn't beat me up. She just was so annoying and so good. It's just like, I don't understand why I can't get through to this woman that she's leading a deceived life. But she wouldn't budge. And I recognize now that she had the discernment of the Holy Spirit in how she was ministering to me. Because the minute she would have said, "You're going to hell, we're done talking, I'm out of here." But she never did. We had an amazing lunch 12 years later when I shared how her influence had such a profound impact on me that led me to Christ. But without that Holy Spirit in her, she would have said something that would have ticked me off. The other one was our pastor, the first church I went to where I was born again. I didn't want to go to church, but I went. And there was any number of things he could have said from the pulpit that would have driven me away, because I thought the church was a joke. No, don't say that you still kind of think that, Dan. Say the church is doing really good. No, the churches need to step up. I really believe if they were to start teaching sound doctrine, yeah, you have 500-600 people in a church, it might get whittled down to 100 in a heartbeat. But dear Lord, can't we start building it up? You know, there were times I've seen, you know, back in the day, Hunter, one of my, was a youth pastor when we were really hitting our stride. He decided one year, he said, "I see what you're doing, it's really working, and I'm going to do something radical in September. I'm going to start going deep." And I said, "You know you're going to lose a lot of them because they're here for the fun." He said, "Yep, but I'd rather have 25 solid students than 100 that just show up." And that's exactly what he did. And sure enough, he had about 30, but 2-3 months later, he was at 125. So don't think for a minute that softening the gospel message is going to grow the church. It's not. It's going to do the exact opposite. Philip.
How disturbed are you by this woke cancel culture that we're going through right now?
Mm-hmm.
Just talk about that a little bit.
Okay, again, I'd probably have to defer to Sydney because she's the one that created the session that we're going to be talking about at the Coast, but cancel culture is a disease. We know it's going on. We were faced with the unenviable task, and this is where we might appear a little hypocritical. I would assume most people here know what happened with Ravi Zacharias. Shortly after his passing, it came out that he was a sexual abuser. Don't know the degree. I've read the reports and everything. But we had a few of his quotes on our wall of our meeting room. And one Monday night we said, okay, what are we going to do with this? And we voted to take him down. A similar thing happened with Rob Bell. If you remember Rob Bell back in the day, he had just an amazing curriculum for young people. I think it was called Numa. I might have that name wrong, but just really solid stuff. But then he joined the Church of Oprah and said, you don't have to believe in Jesus to be saved. Everybody's saved. So he went off the rails. So we couldn't even recommend some of his earlier stuff that was solid for fear that somebody would look at that and go, wow, he's really good. I wonder what else he has. And then they pick up, you don't need Jesus to be saved. So cancel culture, it cuts both ways, but some of it is just patently absurd in terms of that. But if you ask me that question, in about 2 weeks after we get back from the Coast, I'll be able to have a consolidated answer from about 20 students on how we deal with that and what we do with it.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Really do appreciate you coming to speak again.
Thank you.
I want to remind everyone that this is our last YouTube Live presentation, so we will be meeting at the LFC on the campus of UT starting next month in August. We will still record those meetings. They won't be live, but they'll probably be edited and posted hopefully about a month later. So they will be available at a later time. And remind everyone, September the 11th is in 2 months. Try and plan to spread some light. hopefully spread some of the love. And again, if you need a light kit, come to our August meeting or send an email to reasonstbaustin@yahoo.com, and we'll be happy to send you a light kit, even more if you need them. Again, thanks again, Dan.
Okay, thank you.